Cave Story is one of the most influential indie games of all time, and for good reason. It was a tightly paced adventure with great music, great story, great everything, really. And most impressive, it was made by just one guy, Daisuke Amaya. Nowadays, it's fallen out of mainstream discussion. A shame, since there's nothing quite like it. That's one of the reasons I purchased One Dog Story in 2019. I was looking for an experience similar to that, and it seemed to offer it. Unfortunately, 5 years later, I don't remember much of it. About a month ago, it came to my attention after finding out there was a bit of drama regarding the actions of its developers, Big Way Games, and their response to the backlash. Hearing this, I immediately began considering covering their game for my channel, not only because I was curious to see the quality of their game after 5 years, but also because I wanted to see if the allegations against them were true. Here's a bit of a disclaimer though, since I want to make one thing very clear. My thoughts on the game won't be affected by the controversies surrounding it. I'll discuss them after I'm done talking about it, but I don't think it's fair to One Dog Story, or any product for that matter, to be more or less charitable to it based on the behavior of its creators. With that out of the way, let's begin. In a laboratory deep underground, our protagonist, EO43, wakes up from his slumber after an accident causes his test tube to break. He has no memory of who he is, third time's the charm I guess, and ventures outside of his containment room in search of answers. He soon discovers the entire lab is thoroughly fucked. Everything is in complete disrepair, and monsters have killed most of the staff. Traveling along with him is Lilith, an AI installed in his brain. Most of her programs are on the fritz though, making her only real uses providing information and emotional support. And she ain't exactly great at the latter, being a total doomer most of the time. Regardless, the two of them are stuck together and have to fight their way through the ruined complex. Reading through the journal entries, the pair learn that the underground laboratory was more of a prison for the workers, even before the accident. One day, however, upper management just vanished. The first to find out about their disappearance, a scientist named Quasar, told those who knew to keep quiet so as to not create a panic. Shortly after, Quasar announced that he was the new manager of the facility, tricking the staff into thinking it was a decision made by the higher-ups. As the days went on with no contact from the outside world, conditions began to deteriorate. As 43 and Lilith blow through different sectors of the facility, it becomes increasingly obvious its purpose was to experiment on living organisms. There are several notes from scientists who appear to regret the things they've done during their employment, but it's never explored to any significant extent, just brought up occasionally. And what was their motive? We may know what the scientists were doing, yes, but why were they being forced to do it? Traveling through the lab, the two come across a familiar-looking face. This is EO42, another anthropomorphic dog created from the same DNA as 43. 43 pursues him, thinking he must know something about his origin, but 42 makes it very clear that he wants nothing to do with him. Based on testimony and reports from other scientists, he has an incredible capacity for violence, and he's looking for a man named Albert. He does an excellent job pissing off the more intelligent enemies, which 43 then has to deal with. Thanks, little bro. Eventually, 42 attempts to deal with his brother once and for all in a final confrontation, but this fails. Now at the mercy of 43, he's either killed or spared depending on the player's decision. Honestly, I thought the game would try and do more with 42, but after this point, he doesn't appear again until the very end of the game, even if he's spared. He's the closest thing there was to a main antagonist, so can you blame me for thinking he would be a little more important to the plot? Throughout One Dog Story, the player has several opportunities to make decisions about the fates of characters. I'm not sure how important these decisions are to the story because I didn't want to do multiple runs, but since I'm pretty sure I got the best ending, I'll only talk about what happened in my playthrough. 43's memories slowly returned to him during occasional blackouts. He was originally a stray dog Albert found before his job at the lab. He was allowed to stay with the scientists, where he quickly built a bond with Quasar's daughter. Unfortunately, not all of the employees enjoyed the commotion the two caused, viewing the duo as a safety hazard to themselves and the research team. After defeating the complex's security system, 43 and Lilith enter the core of the facility. It's here where they finally meet Albert in the flesh. While he appears genuinely happy to see 43, he doesn't wish to answer any questions at the moment. He asks 43 to fetch some crystals, which he can use to portal to the upper levels of the lab and eventually open up a path to the outside world. Lilith, however, believes Albert is untrustworthy due to abandoning 43 in that test tube, and tries to talk him out of helping the guy. During this fetch quest, 43 and Lilith run into Quasar, who's in a bit of a depressed state, muttering about how awful Albert is and how sorry he was for not being able to save his daughter. It's here where Lilith reveals that Quasar's daughter died after being threatened by Albert. She and 43 argue over whether or not they can trust him, but since he's the one in control of the body, they finish collecting the crystals. Before he can confront Albert about this, Albert tells 43 to fix the portal before they can discuss anything, as it's the only way out of the facility. Once 43 enters the upper levels, which are literally in space by the way, that's how fucking upper they are, he's no longer able to communicate with Lilith. While here, 43 is finally able to recall the death of Quasar's daughter. Taking into consideration how this game ends, I'm aware this scene is meant to be proof that Albert was the one who killed her, but this is very poorly conveyed. All we can see is Quasar's daughter crushed underneath a test tube, which an outside observer could absolutely view as an accident. When I first saw this cutscene, I initially assumed it was an accident. I mean, come on, it's not as if scientists weren't complaining about their reckless behavior well before this happened. Upon returning to the complex, Lilith reveals that 43 has been gone for over 10 years. How was this possible? Who knows? No one is able to explain it, and I feel like someone should have. During his absence, Albert seized control of the entire facility, raised an army of loyal dog soldiers, and enslaved the scientists still left alive. Despite all of this, however, everyone is still stuck underground. Albert's betrayal of the staff led to a resistance group forming, led by 42, who has apparently decided to let bygones be bygones. Soon after, 43 confronts Albert in his throne room. He has no intention of letting anyone up to the surface, viewing the complex as safety from the horrors of the outside world, and asks 43 to join his army as a soldier. If 43 joins him, he rats out the resistance, leading to the deaths of its members. If he refuses, the two fight, and of course, having protagonist immunity, 43 prevails. The end sequence shows 43 helping out the other scientists, presumably so they can finally escape the complex. My biggest issue with this story is the lack of explanation. After getting to the end, I couldn't help but have more questions regarding the narrative. Why did upper management originally open and then abandon the facility? Why did Albert become evil? How did 43 time travel 10 years into the future? Why did Albert make 2 clones of his dog? What are these horrors of the outside world he talks about? I honestly thought I must have not paid enough attention, but looking back at the footage while scripting this segment, no, I didn't miss anything. I just gaslit myself into thinking that I did. The plot is underexplained, and that leads to an underwhelming conclusion. A lot of the story is told through these computers or lockers that 43 finds all over the facility, and I can't help but think this was a mistake. There's a lot of very important information located in these objects that a player could completely miss if they happen to not stumble upon them. And given the open-ended nature of One Dog Story's levels, that's not hard to do. There's this one cutscene where 43 and Lilith start talking about Quasar and the way he managed the complex. But if you never read about that in the previous areas, you'll think, what are they even talking about? Who the hell is Quasar? So I'll actually take my previous statement back. Maybe I really did miss something about the story. But if I did, why did the game allow me to do that? The music is serviceable, but very little of it stands out to me. I feel like I'd be able to hear a lot of this stuff in a Hollywood action film. I'm not sure if that's much of a compliment nowadays, but there was nothing in the soundtrack I actively disliked hearing. I will give special attention to the track Glitch Dog, which was easily my favorite of the bunch. It reminded me a lot of Cave Story's main theme while still having a lot of its own flair. I feel the same way about the artwork. It works well enough for what the game is going for, but most of it is pretty forgettable. I initially got Albert and Quasar mixed up on account of their only major difference being their hair. One touch I do genuinely like is the sheer amount of destructible objects scattered all over the complex. I admittedly got a kick out of breaking nearly every object in my path, and the sound effects played only fueled my desire for destruction. Occasionally, however, the visuals got pretty sloppy. There were multiple instances where you could see these lines where there should have been black space. Looks nasty. The devs nailed the control. Moving and shooting feels very nice, much like in Cave Story. 43 is given access to a variety of different weapons on his journey, 8 in total. So no matter what your playstyle is, you'll find something that suits you. The baseball bat is a melee weapon that does considerable damage to most weaker enemies. The rocket launcher and saw blade gun are great for bosses because of how much damage they do. The chick launcher and plasma ball gun are great for dealing with enemies from a high place. However, there are disadvantages in having such a wide variety of weapons. The sheer amount of options makes it difficult to change to a specific gun in the middle of combat. In Cave Story, sorry for bringing it up so often, it's just a really similar game. There are 10 different weapons, but a player will only ever have up to 5 at a time, so selecting a specific weapon isn't much of a hassle. In both Cave Story and One Dog Story, some weapons also simply get outclassed by more powerful stuff found in later levels. When this happens in the former, the less powerful weapon is replaced. But in the latter, it sits in 43's inventory for the remainder of the adventure, doing nothing other than taking up space. When I first bought One Dog Story, I was under the impression I was purchasing a Metroidvania, but to my surprise, this wasn't the case. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of Metroidvania elements, but at its core, it's just a platformer. A player will make their way through different levels in sequential order, and backtracking to a previous stage isn't an option. However, this came at the game's detriment because it means if you miss a weapon or a health upgrade, there's no way to return to a previous area and get it back. And since it autosaves after levels are completed, you can't even reload a save file. And the levels themselves aren't linear, making this easier to do than you might think. You'll have to run all over the place until you find the boss room, and only then can you move on to the next level. Speaking of bosses, most leave a lot to be desired. The ventilation level's idea of a boss fight is just to throw a bunch of D-tier enemies on the floor. This plant lets you stand and wail on it from below. The final boss spends more time teleporting 43 around the arena rather than attacking it. And I would like to give a very, very, very special shout out to Mr. Security System Boss, who literally changed the game's mechanics just for his fight. These barrels are supposed to explode instantly upon firing at them, but during this part, they get lit on fire and only explode once they run into the boss. Love the inconsistency. I already talked about the different weapons that can be picked up, but there are a variety of other things that can be procured as well. Hidden in secret areas are weapon upgrades, which give 43's arms a boost in power and range for a few shots. There are also trash bags, which hold miscellaneous goodies like health and ammo, but you may not get anything out of them depending on where they are, since 43 likes to fling what he finds all over the place. This often results in items being thrown in the bottomless pits, or lava, where you'll never be able to get them back. Great. The biggest issue with the game, however, is the abundance of bugs. It felt like every chapter brought in some new glitch that I had to deal with. The music in the mole boss fight continued after I defeated it. I was able to walk in the air after breaking these blocks. Near the end, my baseball bat suddenly had no power-up limit. When enemies die in front of test tubes, their corpses can still hurt you. When I collected this green card from a scientist and quit the program at the end of my recording session, I was able to collect it for a second time by talking to him again. I glitched through the floor and had to restart from the previous save point. And most bizarre, I somehow got the achievement for beating the game on easy mode, even though I clearly played on normal. These aren't the only examples of faulty programming, but I think I've made my point clear. One Dog's story constantly feels like it's held together with popsicle sticks and glue, resulting in a very uncomfortable experience. This is barely excusable at release, but it's even more insulting when you realize it's likely been this way for 7 years. All things considered, it's pretty obvious that I consider One Dog's story to be a mediocre product. I can look past a poorly told story, but when the gameplay is mediocre too, I can't seriously tell people to go play it. There were some good qualities, but they weren't enough for me to be able to recommend it. But hey, it seems the game was still liked by a majority of people, so I guess I'm just in the minority opinion. Oh, right. Let's talk about that drama I mentioned at the beginning. Shortly after One Dog's Story's release, a Steam user named Dravad posted a review of the game, saying,
"The developers released the game and disappeared after 1 month. It's been 3 months now with no response, no fixing of bugs, especially some of which that are game-breaking. I cannot recommend it if the developers released the game and then threw it aside so quickly."
This was followed by an update a while later.
"This game is officially abandonware, with many game-breaking bugs. Do not buy."
Yeah, it's scummy to release a broken game and ditch it after less than a month of work, but that's not where the controversy started. Sometime in July of 2020, he left an update with the following.
"I feel compelled to update this review, now 3 years later, after a couple of comments below. The developers, and friends or whoever, are continuing to try and scam people all of a sudden. You can see a user notified me below of a recent influx of cheap reviews from primarily Russian accounts. If you feel like digging in the comments, you can see I commented about non-English sites being used by the developers back in 2017. I never stated, but it was Russian, so the developers and most people around them at least speak the language. Here we are, 3 years later. All of a sudden, the developers posted a couple of updates claiming they've fixed a lot of things. Suddenly you got a few comments to those updates, primarily from Russian-speaking users, same as the developers, and now we have an increase in positive reviews for the game. Most reviews are 1 or 2 lines, relatively useless commentary, and most importantly, fake. You can dig around yourself, but I snipped a few screenshots here. We have users like tradeit.gg and tradeskins.gg posting a review with 5 hours of gameplay, yet they never got an achievement. They talk about the game's multiple endings. There's also users like roltonheartcs.money being similar. Those already sound like pretty bad accounts in the first place by name alone. Also, one user, legang24, similarly has a positive review with no achievements, yet they have 240 plus hours of gameplay spread across played 60 plus video games in the past 2 weeks on their profile. That doesn't sound valid at all. I'm not saying every review is one, but it seems like a good chunk of staged reviews to boost the developers out of the blue.
Shockingly, Bigway Games themselves responded to the backlash in a comment on Dravid's review.
Untold statement considering that you have not played it since the release of the updates.
Unlike Dravid, I actually played the game since the updates came out, so I can confirm that whoever posted this is full of shit. It's still a buggy mess, even if the updates fixed some of the glitches. Dravid posted one final update, showcasing even more examples of fake reviews, but that's where his involvement ends. I also want to address the implication that One Dog Story's review score went up as a result of the updates fixing stuff. This is factually wrong. This is a chart that I made of the review score for One Dog Story over the entirety of its existence on Steam. Keep in mind that you need a score of 70% or higher in order to get a positive rating on Steam. This chart shows us that ever since its release date, One Dog Story's review score seemed to only get lower until a sudden spike in November of 2019, even though the first of these new updates only came about in March 2020. And what are the quality of these reviews? Are they legit? Most of them are a few lines of text in Russian with relatively little substance, and of course a positive rating. All of the accounts are set to private, and most of them don't even have 3 hours of playtime, so I doubt they beat the game. One review like this isn't a big deal, but the fact that all of them share these characteristics is rather suspicious. Funnily enough, the one Russian language review that isn't like this is a negative one. In March of 2020, there was another spike of positive reviews that had similar characteristics. Starting in June 2020 and ending in October of that same year, there was a slower influx of positive English language reviews. This batch was a little bit different from the first set. Most of these accounts had well over 3 hours of playtime and were actually public, but that doesn't mean these reviews are any less fishy. There's an achievement for getting hold of the baseball bat weapon, which anyone who is even remotely competent at platformers should be able to do in under 30 minutes. However, whenever I check on any of these accounts, they never have any achievements for the game, despite hours of playtime. How is this possible unless they're just sitting on the title screen? These reviews also lack any kind of substance, just like the Russian ones, and in many cases, just don't make any sense. Let's look at a few.
It's a nice Metroidvania. You'll probably dig it if you like the genre.
Well, I've never heard of a Metroidvania that didn't let you backtrack.
Not much to add to a game that has overwhelmingly positive recommendation rating. If you like shooting and jumping on a 2D plane, this one is worth playing. Enjoy. 12 out of 10.
This game never had an overwhelmingly positive rating. At the time of your review, it had a 75.7 review score. If almost a quarter of players are saying to not buy the game, then how can you say that it has overwhelmingly positive reception?
Cute and simple game with a cute little dog as the protagonist. A typical platformer. However, an RPG system was woven here in an interesting way.
What RPG system? It's not as if you have a party of characters to customize to your heart's content. You get upgrades and they're with you permanently.
A game in 8-bit style. The attention to the detail is outstanding, and I love the graphics. It makes me nostalgic even though. The plot is on the level. It's even surprising that this toy is so unpopular. I feel for the puppy though. You might actually feel like crying at some points. Locations are interesting to explore. Thanks for the weapon improvement feature. You can have 3 weapons instead of 1, each dealing different damage.
How would you know that you can have 3 weapons? You didn't even get the first one. The baseball bat is required to progress. You can't get any other weapons without picking it up.
Gameplay, levels, graphics, and musical parts of the game are performed wonderfully. All in all, highly recommended. For a pleasant pastime evenings in this game, 8/10.
This blowjob was so sloppy, even the local strip club wouldn't hire you.
It's One Dog Story, come on. Good shit, this should be like baby's first indie game. It's a must.
It's One Dog Story? This is the kind of thing you would say for a game that's actually broadly recognized as good. This game isn't even broadly recognized, period.
Pros: beautiful pixel graphics, super sound, great music, charming main character. There is interesting enemies, kind and interesting story. Cons: there are boring enemies, uniform gameplay on some levels.
Shut up. You have 11 hours into this game, and based on your achievements, you didn't even pick up the first weapon. There's no way that you played through enough of this game to be able to say any of that definitively.
Despite the banal plot, the game pleases with its atmosphere, gameplay, and picture quality. This is the same game from your childhood that you played one of the first. The main character is so charming.
What does this even mean? Okay, I'm done responding to this garbage. At this point, you already get the idea. These suspicious reviews go on and on and on. There is no doubt in my mind that most of the positive reviews after November 2019 are totally fake. Untold statement my ass. If I can be real for a bit, it's incredibly disappointing to see an indie studio engage in this kind of behavior. It's not acceptable to release a game in this state, period, but if they had actually stuck with their product and improved it, they could have still built up goodwill among their audience. Many games have done this before, so I don't see why One Dog's Story would have been an exception. Instead, they decided to abandon their game for 3 years and only finally come back to it to flood its page with false reviews. During that 3-year gap, Big Way decided to publish their next project, Steamhammer, in 2017. That game is another controversy in and of itself, but fortunately for the devs, we won't dive into it here. Perhaps another day. If they, by some miracle, do return to fix up One Dog's Story, I will be more than happy to update you all of that. After this video, I can't do anything other than hope that this studio will change its ways for the better. But considering that shady practices seem to be a recurring theme with these guys, I won't be getting my hopes up.